So let's say you've started research on estate planning and you immediately got overwhelmed by all the terms. What does this all mean? Trustor, trustee, fiduciary, probate. It's like a new language. In today's video, I'm going to break down all the terms you'll need to know, and I'll do it in plain English. I promise. Hi, this is Ellen Cookman. Welcome to my channel. In this channel, we're going to talk about how to help special needs families set up estate plans. Estate planning for special needs families is complex, and our goal is to make it as easy for you as possible. If this information is helpful to you, please subscribe and also hit the notification button so you'll be notified every time a new video comes out. My law firm has helped hundreds of families navigate the complex waters of setting up estate plans. So I'm excited to share all of my knowledge and experience with you. Okay, so estate planning is really like a new language. I always try to think back to the first time I ever heard the term a trust. What is a trust? I've been doing this now for over 13 years, so I know. But I also know that a lot of people have never heard of this. You don't go to high school classes learning about trusts and estates. You only learn about it when it happens to you. So I want to talk through all these terms and help you understand them better. So let's start with a trust. I think of a trust as a basket that holds stuff, but what it really is it's a contract. It's an agreement between the person who set up the trust, and that person could be called a lot of different things. They could be called a trustor, a grantor, a settlor, a trust maker, because we like making things complicated and giving a lot of different options. So it's an agreement between that person who created the trust and typically funds it, and the manager of the trust, who we call the trustee. Now that trustee could be the same person, a different person, a bank, but that would be the role of management. And it's for the benefit of the beneficiary. Now with a revocable trust, all three people are the same. The one person setting it up, the person managing it, and the beneficiary. But for other trusts, you could have different roles. Now, the trustee is often called a fiduciary. And what does that mean? Well, in the California probate code, there's a lot of rules and responsibilities that someone managing a trust, a fiduciary, has. And so you really want to choose someone who's responsible, who you trust. I think that's why the word really is trustee. Then when you're setting up a trust, you also want to name a successor trustee. So what is that? That's the person who's next in line for acting as trustee after the initial trustee is not able to do it. And the beneficiary is the person who ultimately inherits the assets. All right, so as I mentioned, there's a lot of different types of trusts. There's the revocable living trust, which is common in California to avoid probate. There are special needs trusts, which are really helpful to protect public benefits for a disabled person. There's a dynasty trust, which is really helpful to protect inheritance for a typical person and do asset protection. There's a bypass trust, and the bypass trust can be called a lot of different things. An exemption trust, a credit shelter trust, a family trust, a marital trust. But basically what this is when you have a couple's revocable trust, at the first death, sometimes the trust splits into two subtrusts, and the deceased person's trust becomes irrevocable. That's the bypass trust. That's the trust. It's named that to bypass the estate tax exemption. Then you may have heard of an irrevocable life insurance trust. That's a trust that can hold life insurance proceeds outside of somebody's estate, so they're not part of their countable estate for estate tax purposes, and it can actually be used to help pay for any estate taxes that are due. Or perhaps you've heard of a certificate of trust or a certification of trust. This is a shortened version of the trust document that you can give to the bank that gives them all the information that they need about the trust while keeping the private information, like where things are going to be distributed upon your death, by keeping that private. So I'd like to know, what general estate planning terms have you heard that confuse you? Please comment below. Okay, so a lot of people have heard about a will. A will is a legal document that goes through the probate court process when you die. There's several different types of wills. One type is called a pour-over will. So the idea of this is when you set up your trust, what happens if there's assets outside your trust that you forget to put in? Well, the will can be used to scoop up those assets and pour them over into the trust. That's why we call it a pour-over will. There's also regular wills that you might be more familiar with, where you actually say, I want my stuff to go here and I want my house to go here. That, believe it or not, if it's in a will, it still goes through the probate court process. And that's why we usually suggest doing a trust instead, a revocable living trust instead. Now, there's something called a holographic will. This is a will that you can actually write by hand and sign and date it, and it's effective, believe it or not. Now, it's not done that frequently because it really has to be written properly, but it is effective under California law. So you might think, well, who manages the will? The manager of the will is called the executor. That's the person who carries everything out through the probate court process. The other really important thing you can do in your will is you can nominate guardians. So what's a guardian? That's somebody who can help raise your children if you're not able to anymore. And that always goes through the court process, which is why it goes in the will. All right, so what is this probate court thing anyways? So in California, probate is the legal system that's set up to settle an estate. Now, what does that really mean? Well, if you don't have a trust, and maybe you don't even have a will, then there is a set of rules on the books in California that says exactly where things go and who's in line to manage it, who has top priority. If there's no trust or will, we call that an intestate succession, because there's no testamentary document. The testamentary document would be the will. If it's a testate succession, then that involves a will, but it still goes through the probate system. All right, so let's talk about taxes, because taxes are really at the heart of everything that we do. And so that's when I hear about people thinking about doing their estate plan do it yourself or on the cheap, I really cringe, because it's all the taxes that you need to worry about for estate planning. So let's go through those taxes. So the first one is estate taxes. So that's how much your estate will need to pay upon your death. Now keep in mind, there's an exemption amount, and that exemption amount is how much you don't have to pay. That's your freebie, all right? And it seems to change every year just to keep everybody on their toes. It's called the estate tax exemption. Anything above the estate tax exemption, you do have to pay taxes, or your estate does. And right now, that tax amount is 40%. So it's really a punishing tax. In 2022, the estate tax exemption is $12,060,000, which is a lot. For most of my clients, that's more than enough. But it's dropping down to $6 million per person in 2026. So some people are really keeping an eye on that, seeing if it might drop even farther. So if you're below that amount, the $12,060,000 exemption amount, you don't have to worry about estate taxes, right? The next tax is the gift tax. So that's if you're alive and you're making a substantial gift to somebody else. All right, now there's several ways that you can make this gift and not pay gift taxes. One way is something we call the annual exclusion, okay? In 2022, that amount is $16,000. So that means I can make as many gifts of $16,000 to as many people as I want. If I'm part of a married couple, then my husband and I can make gifts of up to $32,000 to however many people we want. Now, those have to be what we call completed gifts, which means they have to take it and say thank you and be able to go and spend it. The gift tax exemption amount for somebody's lifetime is the same as the estate tax exemption right now. So we call that the unified exemption amount, so 12.06 million. So man, you can make a lot of gifts to people, so you can get started. Right, so the next tax is called capital gains taxes. This is an income tax that's imposed on the gain or the increase in value from the time you bought the property to the time you sell it. So let's say I buy some stock for $1, it increases to $10 in value, and then I sell it, I have to pay tax on that gain, that increase of $9. Generation skipping transfer tax is another type of tax that we deal with. So this is when the government really wants to tax at each generation, and they get upset if you try to skip a generation in order to not pay estate taxes. So they impose a tax called generation skipping transfer tax, or GST tax. So if a grandma makes a gift to a grandchild and skips the mom, that's going to be taxed. there is an estate tax exemption of the same amount, but it's not portable. And I'll tell you what portable means in a second. So if you're married and one person dies, the surviving spouse can elect to port or transfer the deceased person's unused estate tax exemption to the survivor. This ability became available in around 2013 or so. We call this portability. So portability is the ability to transfer or port the unused exemption amount to the surviving spouse. So now the surviving spouse can get all the money and all the estate tax exemption and still be free of estate taxes. That's why we don't see that split to the bypass trust as much, because it's not needed, because everything can go to the survivor and they can port over all the estate tax exemption. I hope these explanations are helpful for you in your estate planning journey. You may have additional questions about estate planning in general. I have a full-length webinar where I dive into all the details of estate planning that's available right here if you click below. Also, be sure to watch this video over here where I go in depth into the difference between a trust and a will to provide more clarity on this issue. So watch this video and I'll see you over there.